I appreciate you joining me for today's Todd Talk. We take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. We've been talking about executive functioning skills. Executive functioning skills are the building blocks that students need in order to be successful in school. But for that matter, they're also the building blocks that we need as adults in order to be successful in life. So, executive functioning skills can be anything from your ability to plan. It could be the metacognition that you have, which is your ability to recognize your weaknesses. It could also be having perseverance or a willingness to push through when things become difficult. So these are all examples of executive functioning skills. The executive functioning skill we're going to be talking about today is that of time management. Now, obviously, time management, the definition is in the term itself. This is a management of your time. So if you are given a certain amount of time, how are you managing that time? If you are given an hour, are you using your hour well to where you're building up to where you're going to complete what you need to get completed by the end of that hour? Or are you waiting to the last minute to get things done? Or are you getting things done real quick, but not of good quality? So there's a lot that goes into time management, but it really comes down to the pacing of things. So if you're running a 2-mile race, you don't start sprinting right off the bat because you'll be exhausted before you get even to the halfway point and you'll not be able to finish. So you have to learn to pace yourself. And so students kind of need to do the same thing as well. Students are usually gung-ho when they start a project and they're really excited about it because it's something new, or they're dreading it because it's something they don't want to do. So for those students that are really gung-ho, they start out, really quick. And then about halfway through the project, or a lot of time, they lose interest, or it's not as exciting as it once was, and they start to not do what they need to get done. So again, time management is about pacing oneself and making sure that you divide up this time so that you can get done what you need to get done. So what does this look like when you're doing this? So there are 3 phases to time management. The first of which is planning. Now, what do I mean when I talk about planning? So we have an executive functioning skills video on planning that you can refer to that gives you several examples of what planning might look like. But just to give you a basic idea, planning is organizing what it is that you're going to do ahead of time. So you don't just start doing. You figure out, what is it that I need to do? What steps do I need to go through? How do I get to this point I want to get to? It has to be organized ahead of time. This also has to do with prioritizing. So when you do organize, these are the things I need to do, which comes first? There is a logical order sometimes to work that needs to be done. So for example, if you're going to be working on a research paper, you can't start writing until you start doing the research. Otherwise, you have nothing to write about. So you have to spend a certain amount of time researching what you need to research. And then once you have that research, then you come in and you start writing. So, and some are very obvious like that, but there are others that are not as obvious. And so we need to teach students like what is the important things to get done, because sometimes students want to go for what is the most fun and what is the shiniest or what is the most enticing, when that may not necessarily be the case. Sometimes you have to put in the hard work ahead of time before you get to that fun stuff. So students need to be taught this and shown what this kind of looks like. Part of this prioritization is also setting realistic goals. So if you say, I want to have this done in a day, well, that might not be a very realistic goal if you are supposed to write a 10-page paper. That's a lot of writing to do in a single day. So if you have a 10-page paper, you should try to parcel that out where you're writing just a couple of pages a day and give yourself a week in order to get that done. This way, you're pacing yourself and you're making sure that you are doing work of quality because you have the time to do that. You're taking your time, you're pacing yourself, and you're setting these realistic goals. Sometimes one way to think of it is to break it into chunks. So if you take this very large time allotment you might be given, Like, let's say you're given 2 weeks to do something. Rather than looking at 2 weeks of work, break that down into 10 pieces of smaller work. To whereas I have this goal to do first, and then this goal, and then this goal, and then this goal. And this is what that looks like. Part of this is also, along with the prioritization, is estimating how much time is going to take you to do what you said that you need to do. So let's go back to our research paper. How many days do you need to research? Well, probably more than one, but you don't want to be spending, the next 13 days of your 14 days you have to work on this doing research and leaving the paper to the very end. You want to pace yourself and kind of estimate what that looks like. Part of successful estimation is realizing what are your weaknesses. So that if you are someone who gets distracted very easily when you go online, you tend to go into a rabbit hole of watching YouTube videos or playing video games or just getting distracted in general, you might need to leave yourself a little more time to research than maybe someone who's more focused when they get on the internet. So you do have to recognize your own personal weaknesses and your strengths and estimate accordingly. So planning is the first part of this. You plan all this, but you know what they say about the best laid plans? Sometimes they don't necessarily go as intended. So there is what is the doing. This is the second phase of time management. So when you're in the process of working on it, what does that look like? So the first thing is you want to have a healthy relationship with deadlines. So if you say, I want to have this done by this day, and you have 3 days to do that, don't wait until the last day with just a couple of hours to go to start working on it. You should work on a little bit the first day, a little bit the second day, a little bit the third day, and that way it's not so big a task. But some students have very unhealthy relationships with deadlines, and they wait till the last minute. And the quality suffers because of this, or just simply doesn't get done. And so we want to make sure that we are not procrastinating when it comes to things. We also want to make sure that we avoid multitasking. So multitasking is the ability to do multiple things at one time. But plenty of research has shown that this is a really ineffective way to work. This is why we prioritize. This is why we chunk, because we focus on one thing and we do that one thing really well. And then when we're finished with that one thing, we move on to the next thing, and so on and so forth. But if we're trying to juggle several things, like if you're cooking a dinner and you have something boiling over here, and you have something that is cooking in the oven, and you have something that's mixing in the mixer, and so something is going to go wrong because you can't possibly devote all of your attention to all of these things. So it would be better if you focus on one of these things and get it done and then move on to the next thing. So we definitely want to make sure that we are avoiding multitasking and focusing on our one goal that we need to accomplish. We also have to consider what's called the 20-80 rule. The 20-80 rule is that typically you need 20%, you spend 20% of your time getting 80% of the work done. So what that means is you may be doing planning, you may be doing prepping, you may be doing all this work ahead of time, but the actual work is only going to be 20% of your time. And so you need to plan accordingly for that, because if you haven't left yourself enough time, then you're not going to be able to get done what you need to get done during this time. You also need to plan for breaks occasionally. Okay, there is, when they say all work and no play makes Johnny a dull boy, and so there's some truth to that. So if students are working constantly, they may burn out, or they may become disinterested, or they may be frustrated, and this is going to affect their ability to persevere and push through when things become difficult. So it's perfectly okay to take a break every once in a while. The issue becomes, are you taking too many breaks, or are these breaks leading to distractions? And so you do want to teach students how to incorporate breaks into something that they're doing and use those breaks in a positive way in order to kind of refresh your brain, or to reset, or to keep you from getting burned out on what you're working on. So this is part of the doing. This is the actual working on the work. And so we need to figure out what that looks like. The final third phase of time management is then the adjustment, or the managing aspect of it. So again, we've made these plans, we've started to do the work, but we can't possibly predict everything that might happen or everything that might interrupt what you're trying to do. So let's say you're like, well, tonight I'm really going to work on this for a couple of hours. And then you come home from school and your mom says, oh, we're going out to dinner with your grandparents. And so all of a sudden you don't have that time anymore. And so we need to learn to adjust to that time. And this is where the idea of perseverance comes into play. Like, how do we, when things don't go according to plan, how do we adjust those plans in order to make it so that we can get done what we need to get done? So one thing you might want to consider doing is keeping track of time. So if you say it's going to take me 2 days to do this, how many days did it actually take you? Now, you may not be able to fix that issue for this particular project, but the next time you have a project, you may say, okay, I estimated this time. I really needed this much time. So what is my realistic time period that I'm going to spend on this? And so we have to make sure that we are keeping track of this, keeping data on our time to make sure it matches up to what we're planning. Because if you plan really, really well, the likelihood of things going really, really well are so much higher. But if you poorly plan, then there's more instances of things going bad or things going poorly. So you have to be able to estimate. And again, this is part of that metacognition of recognize your weaknesses and your strengths. You also want to make sure that you reflect from time to time. So how does this go? How is this going currently? What steps do I need to take to get myself caught up if I'm behind? What steps can I do now that I'm ahead, rather than just, being done with it? What can I do to make it better? So it's part of that management and adjusting things where you're reflecting and checking in with yourself. And when students reflect on those things, they're figuring out, okay, this is what they're kind of rewriting the plans a little bit or adjusting the plans. And that's where the really good work comes into play, is if you're able to adjust your plans, you're gonna produce a high quality piece of work. Lastly, then, part of this is avoiding getting stuck. So sometimes we can get stuck on something. We say it's going to take me 2 days to do this, but you get stuck and it takes you 3 days. Well, then you adjust the other half. Okay, well, maybe now I don't have as much time to work on this, or I have to adjust this, or maybe I have to spend more time working on this than I had planned originally. So I have to go home tonight, and rather than watching, something on Netflix or listening to music, I'm going to actually work on what I need to work on. So it's part of that, making sure that when you do get stuck, that you have ways to push past that and you have ways to get the work done. And so these 3 phases, planning, doing, and managing or adjusting, are the phases that students are going to go through when they manage their time. So this is what time management might look like when students are working on something. So let's say you've given them a 40-minute allotment to work on a poster, to get a poster done about endangered species. And students have been doing research all along, and they're getting to the point where they just have to make the poster itself. So you say you have 40 minutes to take your information and get your poster done. So the student starts out first with the planning process, like we talked about, the planning phase. So they may say, I have 40 minutes total. How am I going to parcel out this 40 minutes? And so they might spend 10 minutes just gathering their research and going through there and finding what they're going to use for their research. Could also be part of this planning, can also be getting materials. So what materials are they going to need to get started? Okay. So that's kind of the beginning planning phase of this. The first 10 minutes is meant for that. The next 10 minutes is spent drawing a rough draft of their poster. So this might be on a piece of paper that they draw this. This might be on the actual thing, but in pencil, so it can be erased. But they're going to give themselves 10 minutes to draw their rough draft. Then they're going to give themselves 15 minutes to color, because they have to color in order to do that. And then finally, you can see we've left ourselves 5 minutes And during this time, they can take the rubric that the teacher has made and compare their work with the rubric and then make any adjustments here. So this is their, their quality control time spent that a lot of students don't have, but we need to teach them to work this in, okay, as part of this. We don't want to finish our first draft and turn that in. We want to make sure that there's anything changes we need to make, we've left ourselves time. And if you don't manage your time well, then you don't have this time. So the planning phase is represented by this black marker that you see right here. And so now we're going to go into the doing phase with the blue marker. So the doing is you actually get into this and you start to figure out a couple of things. So while I'm doing this, you figure out, okay, I need to make sure that while I'm doing this, that I sit in a place by myself, have all my materials out in front of me on a desk so that I can organize my thoughts. So they're planning. So when they're doing this, they're going to be organizing their notes. They're going to figure out, okay, do I have everything I need? Do I have, my colored pencils or whatever they're going to need in order to do this? Do they have a ruler? Okay, so they might want to start making, figuring out, yes, I have this, yes, I have this, yes, I have this, and I'm going to set it all out. So this 10 minutes is going to be really focused and really managed well so that by the time I finish, then I have everything in place. So I can start the actual rough draft. So there needs to be some thought into what this rough draft is going to be. Is this going to be on a piece of paper? And then you're going to take it and make it into the bigger poster? Are you going to actually do a rough draft in pencil on the poster itself? So those decisions have to be made and that time needs to be managed, okay? If I do the smaller piece of paper and I go to the bigger, then what might happen is when I get to go to color it, I have to redraw it on the big piece of paper, and that's going to take more time. So I'm not going to be managing my time in this very well. So they'd have to make that decision. Or the student may say, okay, I'm going to do it on a piece of paper first in the first 5 minutes. And then that way, when I put it on the big piece of paper, I'm not making mistakes. I'm not having to erase a lot. It's going to look really good. Okay, so that's that. Then when it comes to time, they're coloring. So again, if you've done your colored pencils and all this stuff, then this part becomes easier because then you just sit down and do the coloring. But and so when you're doing that coloring, do you have the, everything that you need in order to do this? And then for the rubric, then, are you going to sit down and are you going to say, okay, now that I've got this all done, I have 5 minutes to spare. Now am I going to compare these two? Am I going to compare the rubric to the actual work that I've done? So this is what it looks like when you're doing. The final thing, though, is the management and adjustments. So within these decisions that you have made, there may be some issues that crop up. So for example, you may go to look at your colored pencils and you realize you do not have a brown colored pencil. And yet the animal that you're doing your research on is a brown animal. So are you figuring out then what do you need to do to get this brown marker or brown pencil? Are you going to borrow it from someone? Are you going to ask the teacher for it? What are you going to do? When you work on your rough draft, the first time you do it, it may not work out exactly like you wanted to. So you may have to adjust this to 12 minutes because when you did the first draft of this, it didn't go like you wanted it to, and it took you more time, but you wanted to make sure you had a plan in place before you actually started coloring. So you're going to adjust your time as a result of that, which means you have to take time away from this. So now you're only going to have 13 minutes to color. And so you're managing your time here. And then, of course, what you don't want, and this is what happens all the time, is students say, if I'm going to take time away, I'm going to take time away from this. Okay? But let's say you get this all done. You've organized your research. You found the pencils that you needed. You worked on the rough draft. You needed more time, so you get 12 minutes. You adjusted your coloring time. You colored maybe a little more fast, or you hired someone, a friend, to come in and help you color as well. And then we get down to this rubric part. And you start doing the rubric, and you find out you're missing something very essential that was in the rubric. So let's say the rubric talks about that you have to have statistics about this particular animal, and you don't have any statistics to show. Well, you realize this, and now you can go back to your research and you can try to insert these statistics on the poster that are missing. And so this is where the quality comes into play. So we have these three phases of the planning, we have the doing, and then we have the adjustment and management. And this is what has got to go through a student's mind when they're working on this, okay? These three phases have different aspects to them. And how am I going to react to these different aspects that I need? Why the executive function skill of time management is so important is because in life, there are lots of deadlines. And some of these deadlines are imposed upon us by a boss or a spouse or a child or the school or whatever structure that you're dealing with. It's going to impose a deadline. And so you want to be able to manage their time. So one of the most prevalent deadline that almost all Americans who are adults feel is the idea of getting your taxes in. So every year, the IRS, or Internal Revenue Service, sets the day as April 15th as being the due date for taxes. And so the question is, how do you manage your time? And so this is an example of how some might manage their time.
Sir, why did you wait until the last minute to pay your taxes?
Because I'm an idiot. Happy?
Of course, not everyone is an idiot. Some of us took our receipts and pay stubs to our accountants months ago. And at the risk of sounding a little smug...
Oh, help! Does anyone have a calculator?
Myron?
No. Will you look at those morons? I paid my taxes over a year ago.
Dad,
What is it, sweetie? Did you see a scary picture in your picture book?
that was last year's taxes. You have to pay again this year.
No, because you see, I went ahead and year-wise, I was counting forward from the last previous... So!
I put the tax forms on top of your to-do pile a month ago.
I have a to-do pile? March, how many kids do we have? Oh, no time to count. I'll just estimate. 9.
Oh, you know we don't have...
Shut up. If I don't hear you, it's not illegal. Okay, I need some deductions. Oh, business gifts. Here you go. Keep using nuclear power.
Homer, I painted that for you.
Okay, Marge, if anyone asks, you require 24-hour nursing care. Lise is a clergyman. Maggie is 7 people, and Bart was wounded in Vietnam.
Cool.
If I don't see it, it's not illegal. No, you don't. Punch it in there, drop. Woohoo!
So as you can see, this is a poor example of time management. So Homer has his taxes are due. He has kind of forgotten them. And with a reminder from his daughter, he decides to do them. And then his wife says that she put it out to remind him. But you can tell that obviously doesn't work for him because he has this humongous stack of to do. And so he needs to recognize his weaknesses, like that is not going to work for me in order to get things done. And then he does kind of a haphazard job of getting it done. He makes things up as he goes along. Even when he's rushing to the post office to get his taxes there in time, he stops to get a hot dog and a drink. So he's distracting himself. So you can see Homer is a really bad example of time management. And sure, he got it in at the last second, but it was not done of quality. And actually later in the episode, he ends up getting audited because he does such a poor job where the government is coming in, taking a look at his taxes. So when you think about how this should be done, so how this should be done is there are several steps to when you're trying to prepare for your taxes. So you are collecting receipts throughout the year in order to use those when it comes time for your taxes. So if you run a business and you have to keep track of the receipts, then you want to make sure that you're keeping those all along, because what you don't want is to get at the end and realize I need these receipts and I don't have them. So that's one thing. Then you have to get the forms that you need to fill out. So these can be done online. It can be you can get them at the local library. But do you have these forms in place? Once you have these forms in place, do you have the information that you need, such as your W-2? If you have multiple W-2s, do you have all of those? If you have dependents, such as your children, have you figured out, what that's going to look like? Are you filing separately from a spouse or together? So there's lots of things to consider. Then you have to set a block of time for you to sit down and actually work on this. It's going to take some time to actually do the work, the doing part of it. So do you have everything you need to make this doing part as efficient as possible? Or are you constantly having to start and stop because you don't have this or you don't have that or you're waiting on this? That's when distractions come into play. That's when things don't get done. And then you need to, of course, adjust for mistakes, because if you make mistakes on a tax return, it's going to not be very good. The government may, put a lien on your wages. They could, you could get, as part of the audit. And there's lots of things that can go bad with that. So you want to make sure it's done well. So you need time to check it over. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to wait till April 15th to turn in your taxes. So if your taxes are due on April 15th, turn it in a couple of days ahead of time. There's no penalty for turning it in early. There are penalties for turning it in late. So with that in mind, you need to make sure that you have a healthy relationship with that deadline, that you're not waiting to the last second like Homer did to get done what needed to be done. So as a teacher, I want to give you some final tips when it comes to helping your students to manage their time in the classroom. So a couple of things. You want to avoid managing their time or micromanaging their time so much that they don't learn how to do it for themselves. So I've been in some classrooms where teachers are like, okay, this 10 minutes you're doing this, then in 10 minutes you're going to switch to this, and then 20 minutes you're going to transition to this, and so on and so forth. So we do need to give students the ability to try to figure out this time management on their own. So sometimes when you're giving them work, you give them a block of time to get several tasks done that they then have to manage their own time and figure out what that's going to look like. Because if we're managing their time, everything in their schedule, we manage enough in their schedule, they're never going to learn how to manage their own time. So we have to give them opportunities to do that as our first tip. Give students opportunities. Secondly, you need to give them tools. So what do they need in order to manage their time? They may need a blank calendar. They may need a student planner or agenda. They may just need Post-it notes, where they can start to manage their time. So what tools are you providing them with? Are you modeling for them what this looks like? So you as a teacher, you're given blocks of period that you have to manage your time. So if you have a 45-minute block with your students, you can't just do the work in 15 minutes and say, okay, you have the remaining time to just do nothing. That's not the way that works. You have to manage your time. You have to make sure that you pace yourself. Okay, what you don't want to happen, and what happens to every teacher, is we have this plan in place and we do all this, and then we end up like trying to cram in 20 minutes worth of lesson into 5 minutes because we've run out of time. So we need to model for students as well how to plan, how to manage their time, how to make sure that they get accomplished what they need to get accomplished. The third thing, you don't want to give students assignments that they can get done at the last minute. So we get tired of students who are procrastinators, but sometimes we teach them to be procrastinators because we say this paper is due in 2 weeks, and they wait to the last minute and they do the paper the night before and they still get a good grade. So the lesson learned is I can't be a procrastinator. I've had students that actually say to me, like, I thrive under pressure. That is actually just a coping mechanism. She would probably do much better work than if she wasn't under pressure all the time, because she would have time to go back and make sure it's done with quality work. Because that's another thing that we need to get in the mindset of our students. It's not about getting it done. It's about getting it done with quality. And if you don't manage your time, if you don't leave yourself time at the end to make any changes, to make any fixes, then it's not going to be of good quality. What you're going to be getting is a first draft of things rather than a refined, improved draft that you've had time to fix.